Hey folks, tonight we're diving headfirst into the raucous, smoke-choked, ale-stained universe of medieval taverns. These uncelebrated nuclei of every town served as unofficial news hubs and the sole democratic space where knights, peasants, and minstrels could get equally hammered and equally pickpocketed. These weren't just watering holes. They were pressure cookers where peril, mirth, and communicable diseases swirled together under leaky thatched ceilings. Before you settle in, smash that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely dig my content. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm always fascinated by our global crew. Now dim those lights. Maybe crank up a fan for some ambient white noise, and let's ease into tonight's adventure together. Picture this. You've been slogging through streets that reek like a dubious stew of horse dung, wood smoke, and questionable broth. Naturally, it's either pouring rain or just stopped, leaving everything slick, including your only pair of boots. You're exhausted, starving, and nearly became roadkill beneath turnip carts twice already. You need alcohol. Stat. But how do you locate a tavern in ye old medieval town? No neon signs. No Yelp reviews. Definitely no Google Maps. Your best GPS? Follow the cacophony. Somewhere past the blacksmiths clanging and fishmongers shrieking about fresh eels, you'll hear the symphony of drunken revelry, belly laughs, shouted obscenities, and someone murdering a ballad about waterfowl. And there it is, a listing timber-framed building that looks like the architect gave up halfway through. The sign above the door is so weathered it's unclear whether it depicts a barrel, a bear, or some unholy fusion of both. Doesn't matter. You've arrived. Welcome to the tavern, friend. The doorstep gleams with spilled ale, or something worse. As you shoulder open the iron-hinged door, it emits a groan so theatrical it could qualify as opening night entertainment. Instantly, you're walloped by the tavern's signature fragrance, a bouquet of wood smoke, mildew, stale beer, and mystery meat that hits like a drunkard's slap on the back. Congratulations, you've made it. Inside, the ceiling hangs so low that tall patrons become involuntary limbo champions, while the inebriated regularly test their skulls against oak beams. The floor? Actual dirt. Someone tossed down some straw as a half-hearted nod to hygiene. But let's be real, it's just decorative filth. No private booths, no servers with menus, and forget about civilized conversation. Medieval taverns operate on two settings, rowdy or temporarily closed due to fire-related incidents. You spy an open spot near the hearth, though the bench glistens suspiciously. Nearby, a heated debate about poultry theft escalates. Another patron faceplants into his soup ladle. A cyclopean hound gnaws bones beneath a table like he pays rent. And this is just the lobby, pal. You've barely crossed the threshold, and already this joint smells like a night you'll either never forget or desperately wish you could. As the door slams shut behind you, the darkness wraps around you like a damp wool cloak, equal parts comforting and concerning. Your eyes adjust reluctantly. Candlelight flickers against soot-blackened walls, casting shadows that make furniture look ready to throw punches. The fireplace roars in the corner, pulling double duty as both heating system and arson hazard. Smoke lingers like lazy ghosts, possibly because the chimney's stuffed with a very dead crow. But the real assault isn't visual, it's olfactory. A medieval tavern's aroma isn't so much a scent as a traumatic life event. Top notes: sour ale generously splashed on every surface. Middle notes: generations of human sweat, equine BO, and something suspiciously draconic. Base notes: moldy bread, wet straw, and the haunting whisper of boiled onions. It's a fragrance no perfumer would dare bottle. The tabletops tell their own stories, etched with initials, crude doodles, and knife scars that double as historical records. They wobble with the pride of survivors. The benches groan under the weight of mud-caked boots, travel-stained cloaks, and life choices nobody wants to discuss come morning. That promised dirt floor? Oh, it delivers. The straw isn't decoration. It's a sponge for spills, spit, and the occasional passed-out patron. Watch your step. One misplacement, and your boot sinks into something with a texture best left to the imagination. The crowd pulses like a living organism. Gales of laughter erupt in one corner, while two men nearly come to blows over swine pricing. A woman slams her tankard hard enough to sacrifice half her drink, and nobody bats an eye. At the next table, a man stares at you with the vacant expression of someone either contemplating the cosmos or forgetting how object permanence works. A sneeze ripples through the left side of the room, triggering a synchronized recoil. Yet despite this sensory onslaught, there's an undeniable magnetism here. The tavern thrums with raw, unfiltered life, the medieval equivalent of a community center, just with 400% more vomit and questionable personal hygiene. You claim your seat. It's damp. It's probably hexed. But for now, it's yours. At first glance, the tavern's layout resembles furniture arranged during an earthquake and never corrected. No discernible floor plan. No proper bar. Just a chaotic spillage of tables, barrels, and the occasional crate masquerading as seating. Everything's either claustrophobically close or awkwardly distant, depending on your blood alcohol content. The hearth reigns as sole centerpiece, a gaping maw of flame that provides warmth, light, and complementary lung damage. Patrons cluster around it like moths with drinking problems. Those scoring prime real estate hog the heat. The rest rely on alcohol for internal combustion. The bar is just a warped plank balanced across two barrels, sagging under the weight of jugs, mugs, and elbow grease. Behind it stands the tavern keeper, part bartender, part bouncer, part accountant tracking who's paid, who's delinquent, and who's 3 drinks past reasonable. No menus exist. You get what's available, and you'll like it. A rickety staircase, original construction, guaranteed splinter delivery system, leads to upstairs rooms. Someone's boot dangles from the railing. Is it decor or warning? Nobody's sure. Some taverns have back rooms, maybe for storage, maybe for illegal gambling, maybe where the last guy who disrespected the barmaid got taken out back. Best not to ask. Walls where candles soot like war paint. Windows are covered with greasy rags or questionable pelts. Every surface gleams with the patina of generations of elbows, boots, and spilled liquor. And maybe a chicken. Somehow, this organized chaos works. Everyone knows their role, when to shout, when to drink, when to duck. It's not efficient, but it's violently alive. Every medieval tavern answers to one ruler. Not the local lord or tax collector, but the tavern keeper. This person wears no crown, but don't mistake that for lack of authority. They're equal parts chef, bouncer, accountant, babysitter, and judge of last resort for barroom justice. If male, he's built like a whiskey barrel with arms, grizzled, gruff, and carved from cured meat and poor decisions. If female, often the case, she's sharper than a blacksmith's file, capable of silencing riots with a single glare. Either way, they've seen it all, heard worse, and mopped blood before breakfast. Regulars get nods. Strangers get side-eye. Troublemakers get tankards to the skull. They track tabs mentally because medieval literacy might be rare, but tavern memory is terrifyingly precise. The keeper sets the vibe. Good mood. The place hums. Bad mood. Drink fast and keep jokes to yourself. They referee fights, adjudicate cheating scandals, and are first to grab a club when furniture starts flying. Cross them at your peril. They're also the ultimate intelligence hub. Who's in debt? Who's cheating? Who arrived under a fake name? Need info? Bribe the barkeep. Need protection? Sit near them. Need a favor? Hope you didn't break a mug last week. Some keepers have helpers, kids, spouses, or orphans they adopted to haul barrels twice their weight. These minions ferry drinks, mop floors, and try not to get trampled by drunks. So while the tavern seems chaotic, it's actually a delicate ecosystem. And at its center, commanding like a thunder god in an apron, stands the one person keeping both ale and anarchy flowing, the tavern keeper. So you've finally claimed your spot on a creaky bench, dodging flying elbows and mysterious stew splatters. Your throat's parched, your boots are soggy, and it's time for the main event, the drinks. But don't expect fancy wine lists or polished steins here. This is medieval tavern territory, where your options are limited, lukewarm, and potentially lethal. Let's start with the classic ale. Unfiltered, unpasteurized, and likely brewed in the back room where the tavern dog sleeps. It's thick, cloudy, and comes with bonus floaties, bits of grain, yeast, or possibly fragments of the previous patron's mustache. It's served at room temperature because ice hasn't been invented yet, or at least not for peasant use. And nobody asks how long it's been sitting in that barrel. You drink it and pray to whatever saint handles intestinal distress. Next contender, mead. Honey wine sounds posh, right? In reality, it's cloyingly sweet, deceptively strong, and occasionally explosive. If the tavern keeper brewed it themselves, it might be ambrosia, or taste like fermented regret with notes of bee venom. It's usually reserved for nobles, wedding guests, or that one bard who insists on payment in gold or alcohol. Then there's cider, crafted from apples that were either freshly picked or scavenged from the ground 3 weeks prior. Tart, tangy, and served in mugs that double as soup bowls by morning. The drink of choice in orchard-rich regions, or for anyone trying to forget how the guy next to them smells. Wine, technically available, but unless you're in Southern Europe or nobility's in town, expect it watered down, slightly vinegary, and served with a side of sarcasm. Quality vino gets reserved for lords, bishops, and merchants who just moved 12 crates of salt. And water? That's playing Russian roulette with your bowels. Clean wells are rare, and boiling requires precious fuel. That's why even children drink weak ale, not for the buzz, but to avoid dying of dysentery before their 8th birthday. Nobody's measuring shots or crafting artisanal cocktails here. You drink from wooden tankards, clay cups, or tin mugs, some still bearing remnants of last night's stew. You raise your vessel, take an experimental sniff, and sip. It's warm, bitter, and somehow perfect. Because in a medieval tavern, if it's wet and won't kill you immediately, it's considered top shelf. You've survived the drink, barely. Now your stomach growls, reminding you that your last meal was mostly barley and existential dread. Time to eat. But curb your enthusiasm. There's no menu, no waitstaff, and absolutely nobody asking about dietary restrictions. You don't order food here. You inquire what's left and hope it's both hot and only vaguely suspicious. The star attraction is pottage, a thick stew that's been simmering since Monday in the same cauldron. New ingredients get added daily, nothing gets removed. It's less a meal and more a culinary time capsule. If there's meat involved, congratulations, it's probably rabbit, pigeon, or the unlucky chicken that wandered too close to the fire. Game meat might be delicious or aged to the point of becoming sentient, seasoned with equal parts herbs and desperation. Your bowl is wood or clay. Your utensils? Your fingers or the knife you hopefully brought. Because this is a BYOC, bring your own cutlery, establishment. Napkins. Use your sleeve or the communal rag that's seen things it can't unsee. Bread makes an appearance, dense, dark, and capable of doubling as a self-defense weapon. If it's soft, it was baked today. If it's hard, it was baked during the last plague outbreak. Either way, it pairs well with cheese that smells like old boots and has begun developing its own personality. Occasionally there's salted fish or pickled eggs. Sometimes the tavern offers a special, which is code for we had too much of this and need to get rid of it. Flavor's optional, texture's a gamble. Yet in the flickering firelight, with noise swirling around you and warmth spreading through your hands, it's not terrible. It's filling. It's hot. And if you don't think too hard about what's floating in your bowl, it might even be comforting. You're not here for fine dining. You're here to eat like someone who plans to survive the winter. Once you've secured seating, preferably without embedded cutlery, you start noticing the real entertainment, the people. A medieval tavern is the original social media feed, loud, chaotic, half-true, and completely committed to oversharing. To your left, a farmer with a complexion matching his 4th ale retells the same story about his cow giving birth sideways. He slaps your shoulder mid-sentence like you're his oldest drinking buddy or a suitable replacement for the pig he usually confides in. In the shadows, a hooded stranger nurses a drink slowly. Could be a runaway monk. Could be a bandit. Could just be really bad at eye contact. Either way, you're not striking up conversation unless you fancy disappearing behind the stables later. Near the hearth, a battle-scarred soldier holds court, spinning tales of fighting dragons, Frenchmen, and a talking sword. It's obviously fabricated. Nobody cares. His tankard stays full, and his audience stays laughing. A merchant with sweat stains shouting grain prices. Nobody asked for flaunts gold coins from his purse like a man begging to be robbed by midnight. Two locals play dice on a warped table. One clearly cheating, the other pretending not to notice, saving the confrontation for when the ale runs out. In the corner, a bard murders a love song on his lute, hitting wrong notes with confidence. The high notes crack. The lyrics sound suspiciously improvised. Nobody minds. He's wearing pants and mostly in tune, which already makes him superior to last night's performer. Women move through the crowd, some staff, others working their own angles. Sharp-eyed and quick-witted, they'll trade banter, laughter, or knuckles to teeth depending on your approach. Children dart between legs, swiping bread crusts or dropped coins, an accepted part of the ecosystem. And slumped under a table, one patron demonstrates the tavern's unofficial naptime policy. This isn't just a place to eat and drink. It's a living theater, and tonight, you've got a front row seat. Forget lutes and ballads. The real soundtrack of a medieval tavern is a symphony of controlled chaos. It begins with the percussion of tankards slamming on tables, some clinking cheerfully, others shattering completely, both met with equal enthusiasm. Then comes the laughter, big, belly-shaking roars that sound like a boar discovering comedy. Half of it makes zero sense. A farmer chuckles at his own hair-related joke. A knight giggles at the word pottage. A monk wheezes uncontrollably every time someone says duck. Don't ask why, just accept it. Voices layer like drunken choir practice. Arguments over taxes, tall tales, scripture misquoted to win bets, all competing at escalating volumes. The tavern keeper yells orders while swatting at flies. A barmaid shouts down a grabby patron. Someone keeps bellowing another round, like a battle cry. In the corner, the bard replays the same 4 chords on his 3-stringed lute, occasionally bursting into verses about lost love, noblemen wearing pants backward, or chickens with suspiciously human traits. Nobody really listens unless he starts improvising about someone present. Then things get either hilarious or hazardous. Sound effects include someone spilling their drink, always, an epic belch that rattles the rafters, a chair collapsing under someone who keeps talking from the floor like it's part of the plan. Background noise features dogs barking, a goat bleating, why is there a goat, and furniture scraping across dirt like nails on a chalkboard. Occasionally, magically, the room falls silent for 3 whole seconds. Then someone farts with theatrical flourish, and the cacophony resumes. This isn't background noise, it's the tavern's heartbeat. Raw, relentless, and weirdly rhythmic. Listen long enough, and the chaos starts making sense. A harmony born from beautiful disorder. And like everything here, it only gets louder the longer you stay. Once the ale flows and the stew settles, the tavern transforms into medieval Vegas, minus the velvet ropes, but with exponentially more yelling. Gambling is the evening's main sport, played by everyone from grizzled soldiers to barefoot kids with borrowed dice. No dealers, no pit bosses, just a lopsided table, some copper coins, and the thrilling possibility of watching someone lose both their dignity and their trousers. Dice are the weapon of choice, carved from bone, wood, or whatever wasn't nailed down. They clatter across tables like tiny hoofbeats, each roll met with cheers, groans, or accusations of dark magic. Nobody trusts the dice. Everyone uses them. Cards appear in more cultured establishments, thick, hand-painted, missing crucial cards, with rules that change depending on who's explaining them. Sometimes you want the highest number. Other times you match symbols. Often you just make it up as you go. It's like poker, but with more slapping. Wagers range from coins to mugs to livestock. I'll bet my best goat. Someone inevitably stakes their boots. Someone else their freedom for the night. Spoiler, they lose. The regulars are sharks, quick shuffles, dramatic rolls, smiles just a tad too wide. Cheating isn't just expected, it's half the fun. Loaded dice, marked cards, strategic coughs when opponents lean in. Win big. You buy a round or risk getting jumped. Lose badly. Smile like you meant to, and slowly back toward the exit. Side games erupt. Arm wrestling, thumb wars, drinking contests where victory means not face-planting first. The winner gets applause. The loser gets a headache that lasts till next market day. But even with unclear rules and absurd stakes, the energy's electric. Because in a medieval tavern, luck isn't just a game. It's a gamble with your coins, your pride, and possibly your pants. As night deepens and the tavern fills with warmth and questionable body odors, a new performance begins. One woven from words, music, and unverified nonsense. Storytime, Medieval Edition. A bard clears his throat, plucking at his out-of-tune lute like it owes him money. Missing teeth but brimming with confidence, he launches into a ballad about a knight who fell for a mermaid and drowned poetically. Nobody believes it. Everyone listens anyway. That's how this works. Truth's optional. Entertainment's mandatory. Around the tables, others join the oral tradition, ale-fueled legends in the making. One man swears he wrestled a bear and lived to drink about it. Another claims he saw a witch turn a cow into a goat. A third insists he's Charlemagne's distant cousin. Their stories all begin with, "You won't believe this, but," and they're right. We don't, but we want to. Boasts morph into epics. Mishaps become myths. Someone tells a joke so terrible it loops back to brilliance. Someone else recites poetry likely stolen from a monk's scroll. The room responds with applause, heckling, or bread projectiles depending on quality or blood alcohol content. If you're lucky, a traveling minstrel might perform. A professional who trades songs for coins, meals, and occasionally indoor sleeping privileges. Their materials polished, their tales epic, and their ability to incite riots unmatched. But even they know the golden rule. Never let facts ruin a good story. In this smoke-hazed room, with firelight dancing and drinks sloshing, storytelling isn't just entertainment. It's tradition, connection, the original social network. It's how you make friends, enemies, and drinking buddies who'll remember your name, or at least your tab. Tomorrow, by midnight, half the tavern's reenacting the legend of the one-legged knight who fought 6 bandits with a soup ladle. You laugh, you cheer, you forget it's all fabricated, because in a medieval tavern, every liar's a legend if the tale's tall enough. As night plunges deeper and ale keeps flowing, something shifts in the air, a boozy boldness. The bard's midway through his third ballad about unfaithful shepherdesses when suddenly everyone's feeling romantic. Welcome to medieval flirting, where subtlety left with the last sober patron. It starts with eye contact, or at least one bloodshot eye squinting through mead-induced haze. A gentleman missing most teeth leans across the bench. "My lady, your beauty burns brighter than yon hearth." His lady responds by pelting him with a bread crust. The room cheers. Others attempt smoother approaches, refilling mugs, offering compliments that sound better after 6 drinks, volunteering to carry stew bowls, which still spill. If you're female here, staff, guest, or merchant, you're fielding at least 3 would-be poets, 2 arm wrestlers, and 1 genius trying to impress you by balancing cutlery on his nose. Sometimes it works. Usually it ends with black eyes or empty purses. For those actually seeking companionship, taverns offer more than clumsy courtship. Professional companionship exists. Women, and sometimes men, working the room with practiced ease, identifying who has coin, who has charm, and who will pass out before reaching the stairs. Transactions are discreet, but implications echo loudly. Jealousy? Oh yes. Nothing sparks tavern brawls faster than wandering hands or husbands catching wives laughing too hard at the bard's dirty limericks. Tables flip. Tankards become weapons. Benches get repurposed as blunt instruments. Yet amid this chaos, genuine connections flicker. A shy baker's daughter and traveling stonemason bonding over shared stew. 2 farmers discovering mutual hatred of turnips. A monk accidentally flirting with a nun. Love, or something resembling it, survives even here. Equal parts charm, chance, and not face-planting into your dinner mid-seduction. You might win a heart. You might earn a slap. Either way, you'll remember it, or at least hear about it tomorrow from everyone who witnessed your shame. It was inevitable. Maybe someone spilled a drink. Maybe someone cheated at dice. Maybe two idiots claimed the same bench and neither would back down. Or maybe someone insulted someone else's mother/goat/soup preferences. Doesn't matter. Suddenly, it's on. The tavern, once a blur of music and merriment, transforms in an instant. A stool flies. A tankard shatters. Someone yells, "Hold my bread," and launches themselves like a drunk trebuchet. Nobody's surprised. Most don't even stop drinking. Bar fights aren't anomalies here. They're expected. Practically a feature. And while it sounds terrifying, it's usually more slapstick than slaughter. Wild swings miss entirely. Combatants trip over their own feet. Someone inevitably lands in someone else's dinner. Hair gets pulled. Beards get yanked. Shirts get torn. The tavern keeper roars like a war chief, brandishing a ladle in one hand and a club in the other. Some join the fray without knowing why. They just saw action and dove in fists first. Others place bets, cheer, or carefully relocate their drinks out of splash zones. Weapons, rarely drawn. Most know better. Escalating a brawl to blade work gets you banned from the only place serving hot food and warm ale. Eventually, someone hits the floor and stays down. Someone else collides with a wall and decides that's a fine place to sit and reconsider life choices. The fight burns out as quickly as it ignited. No ceremony, just exhaustion. And here's the beautiful part. Once it's over, it's over. Combatants get separated. Mugs get refilled. Someone starts a song. Within minutes, everyone's laughing again, including the guy nursing a nosebleed. No grudges. No lawsuits. Just bruises, stories, and maybe a new nickname like One-Eyed Arnold or Benchbreaker Bill. Because in a medieval tavern, a good fight isn't a catastrophe, it's bonding. Messy, ridiculous, and weirdly cathartic. And if nobody gets maimed, just another night's entertainment. The brawl's over. The bard's passed out mid-verse. Your stomach's full of questionable stew and fermented cider. It's time to sleep, or at least attempt to. But don't expect plush mattresses or lavender-scented linens. This is a medieval tavern, not a spa. If lodging's offered, it's up a staircase that creaks like a haunted house, past beams strategically positioned to test cranial durability. The rooms? Cramped, chilly, and definitely communal. Privacy doesn't exist here. You're sleeping shoulder to shoulder with strangers, some snoring like sawmills, others dreaming loudly in languages you hope aren't curses. Beds exist in the technical sense, straw-stuffed mats thinner than your hopes, and likely hosting generations of companions, the six-legged kind. You sleep fully clothed, boots on, dagger under your pillow, not for comfort, but because you're not an idiot. Blankets are shared. So are smells. If someone ate garlic earlier, someone always did. It becomes the aromatic backdrop to your dreams. Too poor or too plastered for a room. You're sleeping on a bench, under a table, or curled by the hearth next to a dog of questionable ownership. You'll get stepped on, possibly sneezed on, maybe used as a footrest. The tavern never truly quiets. Between sleep talkers, log fires popping, and distant flatulence echoing through the rafters, it's nature's white noise machine. Yet somehow you drift off. It's not comfortable. It's not clean. But it's safe enough. The fire keeps the chill at bay. The tavern keeper sleeps with one eye open, and the cacophony becomes a bizarre lullaby. Familiar, human, alive. You'll wake with a stiff neck, cotton mouth, and mysterious bruises. But for a few hours, you sleep surrounded by travelers, rogues, farmers, and fools. No kings, no silence. Just snoring and the faint hope your boots remain where you left them. Dawn creeps in like an uninvited guest, pale light slipping through shutter cracks, stabbing at your eyelids with merciless precision. The tavern's changed overnight, not quieter exactly, but quieter in that defeated, hungover way. You peel one eye open. Someone's boot is on your chest. Someone else mumbles about sheep taxes in their sleep. The bard snores under a table, cradling his lute like a lover. A chicken pecks at yesterday's bread crusts. Nobody questions its origins. The fire's died to embers, leaving the room chilled and smoky. A few patrons stir, groaning like wounded veterans of a battle fought entirely inside their skulls. One man sits up, surveys the damage, and immediately lies back down. Today is not his day. The tavern keeper's already up, of course they are, clattering mugs, sweeping straw into fresh piles, reheating something that smells both inviting and vaguely threatening. They eyeball the human wreckage on the floor, then bang a ladle against a tankard like the world's worst alarm clock. Up or out, that's the morning motto. No breakfast buffet here. If you're lucky, there's more pottage, now thicker than yesterday's version. Bread gets reheated. Ale gets watered down. Nobody has the energy to complain. Some patrons just dunk their heads in the rainwater barrel outside and call it hygiene. You check your purse. 2 coins and a button. Better than expected. Your boots? Still present. One now featuring teeth marks. Small victories. New faces trickle in. Early risers, travelers, workers needing liquid courage before facing livestock/taxes/neighbors. The tavern stirs like a beast waking slowly. Someone starts retelling last night's events, already embellished. Now there were 2 fights, and the bard's song summoned a ghost. Everyone nods like it's gospel. The night was chaos. The morning's a groggy, grimy reckoning. And yet, you smile. Because somehow, against all odds, you survived it. By now you've tasted the sweat, the smoke, the sticky ale seeping into your boot seams. You've endured the shouting, the flirting, the questionable stew, and possibly a flying bench to the face. Through it all, one truth becomes crystal clear. The medieval tavern wasn't just a drinking den. It was the pulsing heart of community life, beating louder than any church bell or town crier. In a world without newspapers, smartphones, or social networks, taverns served as the original information superhighway. Here, a merchant from coastal regions could spill gossip about foreign ports between gulps of cider. A battle-weary soldier might share frontline stories that would never make it into official chronicles. Bards wove songs stitching people together, even if the lyrics changed with each retelling. This was where connections sparked. Farmers rubbing elbows with craftsmen, pilgrims breaking bread with thieves, strangers becoming temporary allies before last call. Social hierarchies blurred beautifully in these smoky halls. The local lord's servant might lose an arm wrestling match to a pig farmer. A traveling scholar could debate theology with a drunk miller, both equally incomprehensible by midnight. Alliances formed over dice games. Grudges either died or deepened depending on how the ale flowed. The tavern was also where business got done. Deals sealed with handshakes and splintered tankards. Contracts negotiated over bowls of onion soup. It functioned as courtroom, confessional, and theater all at once. You could find employment, lose your life savings, get betrothed, or start a blood feud within a single raucous evening. But beyond commerce and gossip, taverns offered something more precious: respite from the unrelenting harshness of medieval life. For a few golden hours, you could forget about backbreaking labor, impending famine, or the plague knocking at the village gates. The fire warmed bones chilled by drafty hovels. The laughter drowned out the ever-present specter of mortality. The ale, however warm and questionable, let you pretend, just briefly, that tomorrow's troubles didn't exist. Even with itchy straw beds and mystery meat that might contain more bones than actual flesh, the tavern gave you the rarest medieval luxury, the feeling of being truly alive among the living. When you stepped across that ale-slick threshold, you weren't just buying a drink. You were purchasing belonging, story, and, if the floor space wasn't too crowded, a patch of relative safety where the fire still burned. Long before coffee houses, pubs, or social clubs, there was the tavern, loud, filthy, brutally honest, and utterly unforgettable. Before she became ancient Egypt's most iconic face, immortalized in limestone with those legendary cheekbones and inscrutable half-smile, Nefertiti was a woman wrapped in enigma. Her very name means the beautiful one has come, but nobody's entirely sure where she came from. Some theories suggest she was daughter of a high-ranking official named Ai, possibly even Akhenaten's sister. Others argue she was a foreign princess sent as part of some diplomatic marriage alliance. Her origins are debated. Her influence is not. Nefertiti explodes into the historical record like a supernova, sudden, brilliant, world-altering. She enters Akhenaten's life not as some demure queen, but as a full partner in a reign that would shake Egypt's religious foundations to their core. Together, they dismantle centuries of tradition, discard the entire pantheon of gods, and elevate the sun disk Aten as the one true deity. This wasn't just religious reform, it was theological revolution bordering on heresy. And Nefertiti wasn't just watching from the sidelines. She's depicted smiting enemies in art, a role usually reserved for male pharaohs. She leads ceremonies, makes offerings, appears in more artwork than Akhenaten himself. Unlike queens relegated to background carvings, Nefertiti is everywhere, standing tall, often larger than life, power radiating from her posture. In a society where pharaohs were divine, her proximity to Akhenaten, both politically and spiritually, suggests something extraordinary. Perhaps she wasn't just queen. Perhaps she was co-ruler. But this radical upheaval wasn't without consequences. Egypt wasn't ready for monotheism. The old priesthood seethed at their displaced gods. The capital moved to a brand new city, Akhetaten, modern Amarna, cutting ties with tradition. Through it all, Nefertiti remains central, her image carved into temple walls, her name sung in hymns to Aten. Yet for all her visibility in life, her disappearance is absolute. No tomb, no body, no records, just silence. It's as if history, after showcasing her brilliance, suddenly looked away. And that, perhaps, is where her legend truly begins. To understand Nefertiti's meteoric rise, you must first meet the man who turned Egypt upside down, Pharaoh Akhenaten. Born as Amenhotep IV, he wasn't some minor prince destined for obscurity. This was a man groomed within the thousand-year-old machinery of Egyptian royalty and gods. But something in him shifted, divine inspiration or madness, depending which historian you ask. When he took the throne, he didn't just tinker with religion, he detonated it. Out went Ammonius, chief of gods. In came Aten, the sun disk itself, as sole deity. This wasn't reform. It was revolution cracking the bedrock of Egyptian civilization. Imagine telling an entire society their gods were false, their temples obsolete, their rituals meaningless, overnight. Akhenaten didn't suggest monotheism. He enforced it. Ammonius' temples were shuttered, his name chiseled off monuments, his priests displaced. Entire cities were abandoned as Akhenaten built his new capital Akhetaten, a city dedicated solely to Aten, where dawn broke directly between cliff faces to bathe the streets in sacred light. And through this maelstrom stood Nefertiti, not as silent ornament, but as active participant. In temple reliefs, she worships Aten with the same intensity as Akhenaten. Their daughters cluster around them, small faces upturned toward the sun's rays. These aren't stiff, formal portraits. They're intimate family scenes unprecedented in Egyptian art. Even the artistic style changed. No more rigid formalism, but flowing, exaggerated, almost tender depictions. The king and queen kiss, play with their children, pray in loose robes beneath Aten's rays. Nefertiti's presence is inescapable. At times, she overshadows her husband. Some inscriptions even refer to her as Neferneferutin, a name some scholars believe she used when ruling independently. Whether Akhenaten shared power out of love, strategy, or necessity remains debated. But one thing's clear, without Nefertiti, this religious earthquake might have collapsed faster. Yet revolutions are fragile. Gods don't take kindly to being fired. And the people? They watched, waited, bided their time for the old order's return. At the height of her influence, Nefertiti transcended queenhood. She became icon, not just of beauty, but of divine femininity and royal authority. Egypt had known powerful queens before, almost Nefertari, Hatshepsut, but Nefertiti's power felt different. She wasn't ruling from shadows or seizing power through war. She was reshaping Egypt's spiritual landscape beside her husband in real time, a living goddess. She bore Akhenaten's 6 daughters, Meritaten, Meketaten, and Enkhisimpeten among them. all frequently depicted in family scenes under Aten's rays. Conspicuously, no sons appear in records. In a dynasty obsessed with male heirs, this was both political crisis and historical mystery. Did Akhenaten have sons through other wives? More controversially, through Nefertiti herself? The speculation ranges from scholarly to sensational. What's undeniable is how central motherhood was to her image. In art, Nefertiti cradles her children, their tiny hands reaching for her beaded collar. These aren't cold stone monuments. They're snapshots of affection, warmth radiating through the limestone. In an era where pharaohs were distant gods, Nefertiti's portrayal as nurturing mother humanized the divine. Yet another side exists, one far more formidable. Multiple depictions show her wearing the blue war crown of pharaohs. She's shown smiting enemies, riding chariots, making offerings without Akhenaten present. These weren't symbolic gestures. This was a queen performing sacred kingly duties. The implication? Nefertiti may have been preparing not just to support power, but to wield it alone. Whispers in the archaeological record suggest that as Akhenaten's health declined, possibly from genetic disorders or stress, Nefertiti assumed greater governing responsibility. But here the record fractures. Around year 12 of Akhenaten's 17-year reign, Nefertiti vanishes. No death announcements, no mourning scenes, no confirmed burial. Did she die young? Fall from favor? Or, more intriguingly, was she transitioning into something even greater than queen? Something history tried and failed to erase. One day Nefertiti was everywhere, etched into temple walls, praised in hymns, ruling beside a revolutionary pharaoh. Then, like breath vanishing in desert wind, she's gone. No ancient Egyptian queen had been so visible, yet around 1336 BCE, the records fall silent. Her name disappears from inscriptions. Her image fades from art. No tomb, no funeral, no explanation. For a woman central to Egypt's greatest religious upheaval, this absence isn't just strange, it's screamingly suspicious. So what happened? Theory 1. She died. Childbirth was perilous even for royalty. The disappearance of her second daughter Meketaten around the same time hints at possible tragedy, mother and child lost together. But if so, where's the grand funeral? The memorial temple? This was a woman revered as near divine. Quiet disappearance doesn't fit. Theory 2. Political downfall. Maybe Akhenaten, increasingly isolated, sidelined her for another wife, possibly the mysterious Kia. Some suggest a co-regent named Smenkhare replaced her. Was this a male heir? A half-brother? Or, most electrifying theory, was Smenkhare Nefertiti herself under a new name? Evidence suggests someone named Ankheperor Neferneferutin ruled briefly after Akhenaten, using feminine grammar in inscriptions, even referencing Akhenaten as beloved husband. Could this have been Nefertiti crowned as pharaoh? If so, she'd join Hatshepsut as Egypt's rare female kings. But even this theory dissolves. Neferneferutin's reign ends abruptly. Enter Tutankhaten, later Tutankhamun, the boy king who'd restore the old gods. If Nefertiti did rule alone, it was brief. And if she was Smenkhare or Neferneferutin, she ruled as a ghost, visible only in fragments, half-erased cartouches, broken relics. A puzzle missing its centerpiece. Thus, just as suddenly as she appeared, Egypt's most powerful woman vanishes. But her legend? That was just beginning. As Amarna's dust settled, a new figure emerged, a boy barely old enough to hold a scepter. His name was Tutankhaten, later Tutankhamun, destined to become history's most famous pharaoh, not for his reign, but for his untouched tomb. But here's the burning question. Who was his mother? The records are maddeningly silent. His father was almost certainly Akhenaten, but his mother's identity remains hotly debated. Some argue Nefertiti was his stepmother. Others speculate she may have been his biological mother, pointing to art placing Tutankhamun as a young child during her final appearances. If Nefertiti bore him, it would explain his early reign's smooth handling, clearly guided by someone experienced. His reversal of Akhenaten's religious revolution may not have been his decision alone. Who was pulling strings during Tutankhamun's fragile reign? The boy king was only 9, too young to restore an empire solo. Someone was steering, someone versed in court politics, religion, and symbolism. Nefertiti, her possible father-eye, both working to erase Amarna's chaos. One tantalizing clue comes from Tutankhamun's tomb, a golden shrine showing a woman anointing the young king. Her features eerily resemble Nefertiti's. If accurate, she may not have vanished, but transitioned into power behind the scenes. Yet without a named tomb or confirmed mummy, we're left with fragments. If she guided Tutankhamun, her fingerprints are everywhere, her name nowhere. Scrubbed from temples, omitted from king lists, as if someone tried to erase a woman who once ruled as a god. The irony? Tutankhamun's fame would resurrect her, because in searching for his story, the world stumbled upon hers. For someone central to Egypt's most radical era, queen, high priestess, possible pharaoh, Nefertiti left no confirmed tomb. Not a single monument bears her death rites, no sarcophagus, no funerary mask, no inscriptions whispering to gods. It's as if she evaporated. This absence haunts Egyptology. In a culture obsessed with the afterlife, where every noble was mummified, entombed, and equipped with spiritual roadmaps, how could one of history's most powerful women be lost? Theory 1. Hasty burial during Amarna's collapse. Maybe her radical legacy made her dangerous to the new regime, her tomb dismantled, her name erased as part of the anti-Aten purge. After all, the return to traditional gods was swift and vengeful. Theory 2. She's not lost, just misidentified. Some researchers propose she lies in the Valley of Kings, possibly in hidden chambers adjacent to Tutankhamun's tomb. In 2015, radar scans of KV-62 suggested voids behind walls, sparking global excitement. Was Nefertiti buried inches away, sealed and forgotten? Further scans proved inconclusive. Excavation stalled. The mystery deepened. Yet her absence speaks volumes. We have her images, dozens, perhaps hundreds, her likeness captured in stone and pigment. Her Berlin bust still gazes across museum glass with that inscrutable half-smile, as if she knows secrets we don't, as if she's waiting. Every year, new digs continue at Amarna and the valley. Every year, whispers resurge. Could a sealed chamber reveal her? Could an overlooked cartouche spell her true name? Or is she destined to remain history's eternal riddle, an unfinished sentence in Egypt's story? If history buried her, it didn't succeed for long. Because the search for Nefertiti never stopped, it only intensified. If her tomb was never found and her body never identified, why does she endure in memory? The answer sits in Berlin's Neues Museum, a limestone bust that captivated the world since its 1912 discovery. She gazes forward, poised, serene, neck elongated beneath that iconic blue crown. One eye remains unfinished, whether by artistic choice or workshop accident, we'll never know. Yet even incomplete, she's timeless. The bust was found in sculptor Thutmose's Amarna workshop by German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt. When he brushed off the dust, he reportedly wrote in his diary, "Description is useless. You must see it." And once the world saw, Nefertiti transcended history, becoming global icon of beauty, power, and mystery. But even this masterpiece isn't without controversy. Egypt demands its return. Germany refuses, citing fragility. To Egyptians, she's cultural soul trapped abroad. To Berlin, she's their Mona Lisa. Regardless, her presence changed how we view ancient women, not as passive ornaments, but as regal, assertive figures radiating quiet command. It's remarkable how one sculpture, silent, delicate, resurrected someone lost to time. We may never find her tomb or know her death, but through this bust, Nefertiti achieved immortality, not in gold, but in human imagination. The stone is static, the legend grows. Nefertiti's story lives between artifact and absence, one of history's most documented women, yet ultimately unknowable. Across centuries, she's been reimagined endlessly. To some, divine beauty incarnate. To others, political mastermind. To romantics, tragic figure lost in sands of revolution, to realists, ambitious ruler navigating collapsing empire with cold calculation. But what do we truly know? We know she was more than royal consort. Her imagery rivals kings. Her presence in religious rites, royal ceremonies, even battle scenes reveals a woman not beside power, but wielding it. In a patriarchal world, she carved space not through rebellion, but through undeniable presence, commanding visual and spiritual language of her time. We know she was architect of history's boldest religious shift. While Akhenaten envisioned Aten's monotheism, Nefertiti embodied it, human face of divine ideal, bridge between celestial and earthly. She didn't just serve gods, she became their image. And we know that after vanishing, her memory was nearly erased. The backlash against Amarna swept her name into oblivion, statues smashed, inscriptions defaced, her role deliberately buried. Yet here we are, 3 millennia later, still whispering her name. Why? Because myth survives where facts falter. Because when a woman becomes both icon and enigma, she slips beyond time's grasp. Because sometimes questions echo louder than answers. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's exactly how Nefertiti intended, to be remembered, not explained, admired, not contained, eternal not in one tomb, but in endless speculation. The tavern's true alchemy reveals itself after midnight, when the fire burns low and the ale works its magic on tired souls. This is when ordinary folk transform into philosophers, when farmers debate theology with the fervor of university scholars, and when the miller's assistant, who can barely spell his name, suddenly develops revolutionary theories about the feudal system. The tavern becomes the great equalizer, where social hierarchies dissolve like sugar in hot mulled wine. Watch the scene unfold. In one corner, a grizzled blacksmith holds court, demonstrating how to properly insult a Frenchman. Key points: mention their weak beer and suspiciously clean tunics. His audience of nodding apprentices hangs on every slurred word, committing these diplomatic skills to memory. Nearby, 2 merchants engage in the medieval version of networking, exchanging exaggerated tales of bandit encounters while discreetly feeling each other's cloak fabrics for quality. This? Oh, just simple Flemish wool, hers one, knowing full well his companion recognizes the expensive Venetian dye. The tavern's resident intellectual, usually the guy who once visited London and hasn't shut up about it, holds forth on astrology. See that red star? Means plague's coming, he announces, conveniently ignoring that he's predicted 12 plagues this year alone. A cluster of wide-eyed villagers nonetheless edge closer, mentally calculating how many chickens they should sacrifice to St. Roch just in case. Meanwhile, the love drama unfolds with all the subtlety of a drunken joust. Young Thomas the Thatcher has been stealing glances at Widow Agnes all evening, emboldened by ale and the fact his voice finally stopped cracking last month. Agnes, being twice his age and thrice as wise, alternates between ignoring him and accidentally revealing just enough ankle to keep the boy combusting. The whole tavern watches this unfold while pretending not to. Medieval reality entertainment at its finest. Over by the hearth, the tavern's unofficial grandmother, a woman known only as Goody Two-Shoes despite wearing only one shoe, dispenses folk remedies to anyone who'll listen. Toad-in-the-mouth cures toothache, she croaks to a horrified young mother. But you must use a live one, mind. Her collection of dubious medical advice grows more elaborate with each telling, though nobody dares point out that her own cough sounds like a dying goose. The night's musical entertainment comes courtesy of 3 farmhands attempting to harmonize, a sound best described as what happens when you lock cats in a brewery. Their rendition of Greensleeves has somehow turned into a drinking song about pickled herring, with increasingly obscene verses improvised as the ale flows. The tavern keeper allows this because A, they're spending good money, and B, their suffering audience is drinking faster to numb the pain. In the shadows, the real business happens. A traveling spice merchant discreetly shows his special goods to select patrons, tiny packets of pepper worth more than their yearly rent. The local priest, supposedly here to check on parish morals, actually runs the best dice game in the county from his corner table, using a hollowed-out Bible as his rolling tray. Nobody mentions this hypocrisy because A, he lets people win just often enough, and B, his communion wine is the strongest drink for miles. As the hour grows late, languages blend like poorly mixed paint. Traders from Flanders argue with Catalan sailors in broken Latin, both sides gesturing wildly at a map drawn in spilled ale. The village's one Norse descendant, 3 generations removed from any actual Viking, suddenly remembers his heritage and starts bellowing sagas about longboats, much to everyone's annoyance. 2 drunk linguists from Oxford, passing through on their way to Cambridge, attempt to document the local dialect before forgetting what language they're speaking themselves. The children who should be asleep instead play an elaborate game of tavern in the corner, mimicking their elders with shocking accuracy. Little Marjorie practices flirting like Widow Agnes, while her brother Roger demonstrates how to fall off a stool, just like father at Yuletide. Their game turns serious when they start negotiating imaginary sheep prices, proof that commerce is in their blood. By the time dawn's first light creeps through the shutters, the tavern has transformed again. The philosophers have become snoring heaps. The would-be lovers have either paired off or passed out in embarrassment. The musicians have devolved to humming tunelessly into their empty cups. Only the tavern keeper remains alert, moving between tables to collect the last payments and separate cutlery from beards. This nightly metamorphosis, from workplace to social hub to confessional to dormitory, is the tavern's true magic. For a few copper coins, it offered medieval people what no castle or cathedral could: a place to be gloriously, messily human. Where a serf could outrink a knight, where a woman could speak her mind without fear of the stocks, where the weight of feudal life lifted just long enough to remember how to laugh. And when the hungover survivors stumble out into the morning mist, blinking like newborns, they carry something precious back to their daily grind: stories to share, secrets to keep, and the knowledge that when evening falls, the tavern's warm embrace will be waiting, the fire will be lit, the ale will flow, and for a few more hours, they'll all be kings and queens of their own tiny, tipsy kingdom. By mid-morning, the tavern stirs back to life, not with the rowdy clamor of the night before, but with the slow, groaning rhythm of resurrection. The floor, still sticky from spilled ale and dubious substances, bears the imprint of last night's chaos: a lone boot abandoned near the hearth, a dented tankard rolling under a bench, and the lingering scent of smoke, sweat, and something that might have once been stew. The tavern keeper, already nursing a mug of small beer, breakfast of champions, surveys the damage with the weary resignation of a battlefield general. Their assistant, usually some poor relation or indebted orphan, drags a bucket of murky water across the floor, scrubbing its stains with the enthusiasm of a condemned man. The straw, now more sludge than bedding, gets kicked into a pile for burning. A chicken pecks at the remains of someone's forgotten bread, utterly unimpressed by human folly. The breakfast crowd. The first patrons of the day aren't the revelers but the survivors, those who either slept it off in a corner or stumbled home only to return at dawn for the hair of the dog remedy. They sit hunched over their drinks, faces pale, eyes squinting against the cruel brightness of daylight filtering through the shutters. God's teeth, mutters a carpenter, pressing his forehead against the cool wood of the table. Who put an anvil in my skull? The tavern keeper slides him a bowl of thin porridge, more water than grain, and a mug of weak ale. Drink. Sweat it out. And next time, remember that mead isn't water. Nearby, a weaver groans as she prods at a broken lute string tangled in her hair. Did I sing last night? Like a dying seagull, confirms the blacksmith, grinning through his own misery. Breakfast in a medieval tavern isn't a meal, it's a medical intervention. The menu consists of whatever might settle a stomach or numb a headache. Small beer, barely alcoholic, but safer than water. Porridge, unseasoned, unexciting, and therefore unlikely to provoke rebellion from fragile digestive tracts. Cheese, aged to the point of indestructibility, capable of being used as a weapon in a pinch. Bread, stale enough to require soaking in ale, which conveniently disguises the fact that it might also be hosting a family of weevils. No one speaks much. Conversation is an assault on tender ears. The only sounds are the rhythmic scraping of spoons, the occasional groan, and the tavern cat, a battle-scarred Tom with one ear, licking last night's leftovers from the floor. The midday shift. By noon, the tavern sheds its infirmary atmosphere and becomes something resembling a respectable establishment. The merchants arrive, shaking off road dust and haggling over the price of ale before they've even sat down. The local scribe sets up in a corner, offering letter-writing services for those who can't read. Most people, or who need a love note polished into something presentable. Many people. A pair of traveling minstrels tune their instruments, testing the room's tolerance for music after last night's auditory crimes. They're professionals, meaning they know to start slow, with gentle ballads rather than raucous drinking songs. At least until the crowds had enough ale to forget their hangovers. The midday meal is served. Pottage, again, now with extra mystery meat. Possibly the same batch as yesterday, just reheated. Bread, slightly fresher, accompanied by a dish of suspiciously green-tinged butter. Roasted onions, the one vegetable even medieval cooks couldn't ruin. The tavern keeper moves between tables, part host, part gossip monger, part therapist. They know who's feuding with whom, whose daughter ran off with the tinker, and which farmer's sheep got into the Lord's orchard again. Information is currency here, and the tavern is the bank. The afternoon lull. By mid-afternoon, the tavern enters its quietest phase, the lull between the merchant's departures and the evening crowd's arrival. The scribe naps at his table, quill still in hand. The minstrels argue quietly over whose turn it is to play the next set. The cat claims an entire bench for his personal sunbathing. This is when the real work happens. Barrel tapping. The tavern keeper's apprentice wrestles with a new cask of ale, praying it doesn't explode upon opening. Vegetable chopping. A kitchen boy sighs as he turns a mountain of turnips into slightly smaller turnips. Fire tending. The hearth must be fed, or the evening stew will be cold, and cold stew is how tavern brawls start. A few regulars linger, nursing their drinks and swapping stories. A peddler displays his wares: combs, ribbons, a suspicious dragon's tooth that looks suspiciously like a goat's molar. A traveling monk sips watered wine while pretending not to listen to the gossip. The evening surge. As shadows lengthen, the tavern's pulse quickens again. The evening crowd arrives, laborers fresh from the fields, craftsmen wiping sawdust from their sleeves, and the first wave of serious drinkers, already eyeing the strongest ale. The minstrels, sensing the shift in mood, abandon their gentle ballads and launch into a drinking song. Within minutes, half the room is roaring along, tankards sloshing. The tavern keeper circulates with a fresh cask, topping up mugs before they're even empty. The night's entertainment unfolds. Dice games, played with varying degrees of honesty. Arm wrestling, a contest that inevitably ends with someone's elbow in the pottage. Storytelling, the same tales, told with increasing exaggeration each round. By full dark, the tavern is alive again, a roaring, singing, arguing, laughing beast. The cycle resets. The ale flows. The fire crackles. And for a few more hours, the world outside doesn't matter. Because tomorrow the tavern will wake again, ready to nurse the survivors, feed the hungry, and host the next night's chaos. It always does. The setting sun bled through the tavern's warped glass windows, casting elongated shadows across the uneven floorboards. Dust motes swirled in the amber light, settling on tankards left unfinished from the afternoon crowd. The hearth fire, freshly stoked for the evening, crackled and spat embers onto the soot-blackened stones. Outside, the village square emptied as farmers drove their livestock home, their voices fading into the twilight. But within these walls, the day was only just beginning. Marta, the tavern keeper, ran a callous thumb along the rim of a freshly washed mug, checking for chips. The familiar motion soothed her, one of the few moments of quiet before the storm. She could already hear the scrape of benches being rearranged in the common room, the thud of a new ale cask being rolled into place. Her son, Tomas, muttered under his breath as he stacked firewood, his shoulders tight with the weight of another long night ahead. God help us if the wool merchants come in tonight, Marta thought, watching Tomas drag a hand through his hair. Last time, they'd argued over tariffs until someone threw a sausage. The memory almost made her smile. Almost. She glanced at the ledger on the counter, its pages dog-eared and stained with spilled wine. The numbers never added up the way she wanted them to. Rent was due to the manor steward by week's end, and the damned roof still leaked when it rained. But for now, the scent of simmering stew, thick with barley and the last of the autumn turnips, wrapped around her like an old friend. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of chill air. A hulking figure ducked under the lintel, Harold the blacksmith, his apron still streaked with soot, his knuckles raw from the forge. He paused just inside, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. The tavern smelled of wood smoke, yeast, and the faint metallic tang of the blood sausage drying in the rafters. Evening, Marta, he rumbled. sliding onto his usual bench that would groan beneath him. She pushed a tankard across the counter without asking. Long day? Harold grunted, wrapping his hands around the mug. The warmth seeped into his fingers, easing the ache. He'd spent hours hammering out a new plowshare for Lord Edric's fields, the rhythmic clang echoing in his skull even now. But here, in the tavern's smoky embrace, the weight of the work began to lift. He took a slow drink, the ale bitter and rich, and let the noise of the gathering crowd wash over him. Across the room, Father Alden settled into the corner with a sigh, his joints protesting the damp. He'd come for the warmth, yes, but also for the voices, the rise and fall of gossip and laughter, the living pulse of the village. The church was quiet. The tavern told him what his flock truly worried about. As the room filled, the shadows deepened. Candles flickered in their iron sconces, their light pooling on the scarred tabletops. Young Will, the miller's son, perched on a stool near the fire, his fingers tapping restlessly against his knees. He'd been stealing glances at Ellen all week, ever since she'd laughed at his joke about the baker's donkey. Now she stood by the hearth, stirring the stew pot, her cheeks flushed from the heat. Just say something, Will told himself. Anything. But his tongue felt like leather in his mouth. Ellen pretended not to notice him staring. She knew what happened to girls who encourage boys like Will, married by spring, a babe by winter, and never a moment to herself again. Still, when she caught his eye, and he promptly choked on his ale, she hid a smile in her sleeve. The door swung open again, and the room hushed for a heartbeat. A stranger stood on the threshold, his cloak damp with travel, his boots caked with mud from the north road. The candlelight caught the hilt of a dagger at his belt. Marta straightened, her pulse quickening. Strangers meant trouble, or coin, sometimes both. Ale, the man said, his voice rough. He dropped a silver penny on the counter. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then Harold shifted, making space at his table. Sit, the blacksmith said, not unkindly. Tell us if the roads are as foul up north as they are here. The tension broke. The minstrel plucked a livelier tune. The stew pot bubbled, and the tavern breathed again, its rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Outside, the night deepened, but inside, the fire burned on. The tavern's air had grown thick with smoke, and the musky scent of damp was as the night wore on. The candles burned low in their holders, their flickering light carving deep hollows beneath the patron's eyes. In the corner, the minstrel's lute had fallen silent, replaced by the rhythmic clatter of dice across worn tabletops. A group of merchants huddled together, their voices hushed but urgent as they debated the risks of sending goods through bandit country come spring. At the bar, Marta wiped down the counter with a rag that had seen better days, her gaze drifting to the stranger still seated at Harold's table. The man had spoken little since his arrival, nursing his ale like a man who expected it to be his last. There was a tension in his shoulders, a coiled readiness that set her on edge. Not a merchant, she decided. Not a farmer either. His hands were too clean for labor, but the calluses on his fingers spoke of weaponry, not quills. Tomas sidled up beside her, his voice barely above a whisper. He's been asking about the old mill road. Martha's fingers stilled on the tankard she was cleaning. Why? Says he's meeting someone there. Tomas chewed his lip. Didn't seem the friendly sort. She exhaled through her nose. Just what they needed. Some fool's midnight dealings bringing trouble to her doorstep. She shot a glance toward the hearth, where young Will had finally worked up the courage to speak to Ellen. The girl was laughing now, her earlier wariness forgotten as Will animatedly recounted some mishap involving a wayward pig. Marta's chest tightened. They were just kids, too young for whatever shadows the stranger carried with him. A burst of raucous laughter erupted from the dice game, drawing her attention back. One of the players, a barrel-chested carter, slammed his tankard down hard enough to slop ale onto the floor. Another round, he bellowed, slinging an arm around the shoulders of a visibly reluctant Father Alden. The priest's smile was strained, his fingers tapping an uneasy rhythm against the wooden cross at his belt. Marta reached for the ale jug. The night was tipping toward that dangerous edge, too much drink, too many frayed tempers. She could feel it in the way the air hummed, like the moment before a summer storm. Then the door flew open. A gust of wind snuffed out half the candles, plunging the room into near darkness. All movement ceased. Even the carter's boisterous grin faltered. In the doorway stood a figure cloaked in black, rain dripping from their hood onto the threshold. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the stranger at Harold's table stood so abruptly his bench toppled backward with a crash. The cloaked figure raised a gloved hand and tossed a heavy purse onto the counter. It landed with a metallic thump, the drawstring loosening to reveal a gleam of silver. "Room for the night," a woman's voice said, low and rough with exhaustion. "And whatever's left buys silence." Marta didn't need to count it to know it was more than enough. She met the woman's shadowed gaze and saw nothing but weary determination. No threat, just someone else running from something. She nudged the purse aside with her elbow and reached for a key. "Tomas," she said, never breaking eye contact, "fetch our guest some dry clothes." As the boy scurried off, the tavern's suspended animation broke. Conversations resumed, though more subdued now. The carter returned to his dice, though his laughter lacked its earlier volume. Harold righted his bench with a grunt, studying the newcomer with open curiosity. The hooded woman ignored them all, her attention fixed on the steaming bowl of stew Tomas set before her. Outside, the rain began in earnest, drumming against the shutters like impatient fingers. Marta turned back to her counter, her fingers tightening around the rag. Dawn was a long way off, and something told her the night's surprises weren't over yet. The storm outside had settled into a steady downpour, its rhythm a dull roar against the thatched roof. The cloaked woman, Ira, she'd called herself when pressed, sat hunched over her stew near the hearth, her hood still drawn up despite the warmth. Every so often, her gaze flicked toward the door, as if expecting someone. Or something. Marta pretended not to notice. She'd learned long ago that some secrets were like embers, poke at them too much, and they'd burn you. Instead, she busied herself refilling mugs, her movements brisk and practiced. But her mind raced. That purse had been heavy with silver, far more than a night's lodging warranted. And the way the stranger at Harold's table had stiffened at Ira's arrival, like a hound catching a scent. Trouble, Marta thought. Always trouble. Across the room, Father Alden had extricated himself from the carter's drunken embrace and now hovered near the fire, his fingers worrying the beads at his waist. His eyes, usually so full of patient kindness, were sharp with unease. He'd seen the way Ira moved, the careful, measured steps of someone used to blades. "Storm's getting worse," Harold remarked to no one in particular, his voice carrying just enough to fill the silence. The stranger at his table, Reynard, he'd finally offered, grunted in agreement. His fingers traced the rim of his tankard, his attention fixed on Ira's back. That night to be on the roads. Harold followed his gaze, then deliberately took a long drink. Lucky for some, then, that this place has sturdy walls. Reynard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Will, oblivious to the tension, had dragged his stool closer to Ellen's workstation. The girl was showing him how to fold dough into neat little parcels, her fingers deft despite his fumbling attempts. Their laughter was too bright, too young for the heaviness settling over the room. Then, a knock at the door. Not the wind, not the rain. 3 sharp raps, deliberate as a blade against bone. Ira went very still. Marta set down the ale jug with deliberate calm, her pulse hammering in her throat. "Tomas," she said, her voice steady, seated the barrels in the back. The boy opened his mouth to protest, but one look at her face had him scurrying toward the kitchen. The knock came again. This time, the sound was followed by a voice, deep, rough, and unmistakably armed with authority. "Open in the name of Lord Edric." Father Alden crossed himself. The carter's dice clattered to the floor. Ira's hand slid beneath her cloak. Marta moved before she could think, stepping into the center of the room, her arms crossed. "We're closed," she called, loud enough to carry through the wood. A beat of silence. Then, "Marta Cooper, you'll open this door, or it'll be your head answering for it." She knew that voice. Baronet Gareth's man. Her stomach twisted, but she held her ground. "You've no jurisdiction here," she shot back. "This tavern answers to the Abbey's charter, not Edric's whims." Another pause. Then, quieter, "There's a fugitive within. Hand her over, and no one needs to get hurt." Ira was on her feet now, her hood thrown back to reveal a face younger than Marta had expected, sharp-featured, pale, with a scar running from brow to cheekbone like a crack in porcelain. Her eyes locked onto Marta's, wide with something between defiance and desperation. "God help me," Marta thought. She turned back to the door. "You've mistaken my establishment," she said, louder. "Only honest folk here tonight." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Harold's deep rumble, the carter's slurred "I," even Father Alden's quiet nod. For a breathless moment, there was no sound but the rain. Then, "You'll regret this, woman." Boots crunched on gravel, fading into the storm. The tavern exhaled as one. Ira's shoulders sagged, but her fingers didn't loosen from whatever weapon she clutched beneath her cloak. "Why?" she asked, the word raw. "You don't even know me." Marta met her gaze and shrugged. "You paid for silence. And in this place, that was currency enough." The fire had burned down to embers, casting long, trembling shadows across the faces of those who remained. The storm still rattled the shutters, but the rain had softened to a whisper. No one had left. No one had spoken. Even the carter, usually so loud with drink, sat hunched over his ale, his fingers tapping an uneven rhythm against the wood. Ira hadn't moved from her spot by the hearth. Her hand still rested beneath her cloak, gripping whatever weapon lay hidden there. Her eyes, sharp as flint, flicked from face to face, weighing loyalties. Marta wiped down the counter again, though it was already clean. The purse Ira had thrown down earlier sat untouched, its silver coins gleaming dully in the dim light. Enough to buy a new roof, she thought. Enough to pay off the steward and then some. But taking it felt like signing a contract in blood. Father Alden was the first to break the silence. "You can't stay," he said quietly, not unkindly. Ira's jaw tightened. "I paid." "You paid for tonight," Marta interrupted. "Not for tomorrow. Not for the day after." She nodded toward the door. "They'll be back. And next time, they won't knock." Harold shifted in his seat, his massive frame creaking the bench beneath him. "What did you do, then?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Ira hesitated. Then, with a slow exhale, she pulled her hand from beneath her cloak. Not a dagger, as Marta had expected, but a rolled parchment, its edges frayed, its wax seal broken. "Proof," Iris said softly, "that Lord Edric's been skimming taxes meant for the king. That he's been selling grain stores to bandits during the famine. That he ordered the miller's family hanged for protesting." Will's breath hitched. The miller had been his uncle. Father Alden closed his eyes. "God have mercy." Reynard, whoever he truly was, leaned forward, his voice low. "And you stole this from him?" Ira's smile was razor thin. "I was his scribe." A scribe. A woman who could read and write well enough to be trusted with a lord's secrets. Marta studied her anew. The ink-stained fingers, the careful enunciation, the way she held herself like someone used to standing just outside the circle of power. Harold let out a low whistle. "So that's why he wants you dead." Ira nodded. "If this reaches the king's magistrate, Edric loses more than his title. He loses his head." The room absorbed this in silence. Outside, the wind moaned through the eaves. Then, from the shadows near the kitchen door, Tomas spoke up, his voice unsteady. "What happens now?" Ira rolled the parchment carefully, tucking it back into her cloak. "Now," she said, "I run." Marta looked around at the faces of her patrons. The priest, the blacksmith, the carter, the boy who'd just lost family to a lord's greed. She thought of the ledger upstairs, of the rent she couldn't pay, of the way the world always seemed to tilt toward the powerful. And then she made a decision. She scooped up the purse and tossed it back to Ira. The woman caught it with a startled blink. "I don't understand." Marta turned to the bar, pulling a dusty bottle from the highest shelf. Good brandy, saved for special occasions. She uncorked it with her teeth and poured 3 generous measures. "Tonight," she said, sliding one to Harold, one to Father Alden, and keeping the last for herself, "we didn't see you." She raised her glass. "Tomorrow, you'll be gone." Harold grinned and clinked his cup against hers. "To ignorance." Father Alden hesitated, then sighed and drank. Ira's eyes gleamed in the firelight. She dipped her chin in a nod, then turned and vanished into the storm. The door swung shut behind her. Marta took a long sip, the brandy burning its way down her throat. Outside, the first light of dawn tinged the horizon gray. Somewhere, a lord's men would be stirring. Somewhere, a scribe was running for her life. But here, in this tavern, the silence held. Dawn crept in like a thief, its pale fingers slipping through the cracks in the shutters. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, puddles mirroring the sky, the air crisp with the scent of wet earth. But inside the tavern, the night's weight still pressed down like a sodden cloak. Marta rubbed her temples. The brandy's warmth long faded, leaving only the dull throb of exhaustion. The hearth fire had burned down to ash. The cup sat empty. The others had gone. Harold to his forge, Father Alden to his prayers, the carter to his bed, though he'd likely remember little come noon. Only Tomas remained, sweeping the floor with more noise than efficiency, his brows knit in a frown. "You shouldn't have done that," he muttered, kicking at a stray tankard. Marta didn't pretend to misunderstand. She watched the dust swirl in the thin morning light. "The money. The risk," Tomas hissed, glancing toward the door as if expecting armed men to burst through. "That woman, she's trouble. And now we're part of it." Marta sighed and reached for the broom. "Sometimes, boy, trouble picks you." She nudged him aside and began sweeping in slow, even strokes. Better to face it standing than crawling. Tomas opened his mouth, then froze at the sound of hooves outside. Marta's grip tightened on the broom handle, but it wasn't Baronet Gareth's men. Through the open door rode a party of the Abbey's guards, their tabards bright in the morning sun. At their head was Brother Said, his tonsure gleaming, his expression grim. Marta forced her shoulders to relax. "Brother, early for your rounds, isn't it?" Said dismounted, his boots squelching in the mud. "There's been word from the North Road," he said without preamble. "Lord Edric's men are searching every farmstead between here and the mill." His gaze flicked to Tomas, then back to her. "They're looking for a woman." Marta leaned the broom against the wall and crossed her arms. "Aren't they always?" Said didn't smile. "This one's dangerous. A thief, they say. Stole something valuable." "Valuable?" Marta bit back a snort, as if lives were worth less than parchment. Tomas shifted beside her, his voice too high. "We haven't seen anyone." Said studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Marta, you've a right to run your house as you see fit. But if that woman comes here..." "She won't," Marta said firmly. A lie. They both knew it. Said held her gaze, then nodded. "See that she doesn't." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, the abbots called a gathering at noon. All charter holders must attend." Marta's stomach dropped. "The rent." Said's expression softened slightly. "He's in a mood. Best bring your ledger." Then he was gone, his guards clattering after him. Tomas whirled on her. "What now?" Marta exhaled slowly. "Now," she said, "we pray that scribe is faster than Lord Edric's patience." She moved to the counter, flipping open the ledger with a sense of dread. The numbers hadn't changed. The debts hadn't vanished. And now, with the abbot's summons hanging over her, a glint caught her eye. There, tucked between the pages, lay a single silver coin. Not from Ira's purse. This was older, its edges worn smooth. A token from a different time, when her husband had still been alive to laugh with her over the day's troubles. Marta picked it up, her throat tight. Had Tomas put it there? Or, her fingers stilled. Scratched into the coin's surface was a single word, gratitude. And beneath it, the faintest impression of a quill. The Abbey's bell tolled noon, its deep peals rolling across the village like a warning. Marta stood at the tavern's threshold, the ledger clutched tight against her chest, its worn leather cover pressing into her palms like an accusation. The single silver coin, Ira's parting gift, lay heavy in her apron pocket, its edges digging into her thigh with every step toward the Abbey's looming gates. Tomas trailed behind her, uncharacteristically silent. His usual chatter had died the moment Brother Said left, replaced by a nervous energy that had him kicking every stone in their path. "You don't have to come," Marta said without turning. "I know," he muttered, then added, quieter, "but you shouldn't go alone." She didn't argue. The road to the Abbey was short but exposed, winding past the mill pond where Lord Edric's men had set up a makeshift checkpoint. Two soldiers lounged against a cart, their chainmail glinting dully in the midday sun. One, a broad-shouldered brute with a broken nose, eyed Marta as she passed, his gaze lingering on the ledger. "Off to settle your debts, tavern wench," he called, grinning when Tomas stiffened. Marta tightened her grip on the book and kept walking. The Abbey's great hall smelled of incense and damp stone. The high windows cast slanted bars of light across the gathered charter holders. The miller, the weaver, the butcher, all shifting uneasily on their benches. At the front, Abbot William sat enthroned behind a table piled with scrolls, his fingers steepled, his expression carved from the same cold marble as the saints in the niches above. Marta slipped into a seat near the back, Tomas hovering at her shoulder. The abbot's voice cut through the murmurs. "The king's taxes are due," he said, without preamble. And yet, he lifted a parchment. "Our village's contributions remain lacking." A ripple of unease. The miller, old Joran, his hands still flour-dusted, cleared his throat. "The floods took half our harvest, father. We've barely enough seed for." "The floods," Abbot William interrupted, "are God's will. The taxes are the king's." His gaze swept the room, lingering on each face like a blade testing flesh. "Those who cannot pay will forfeit their charters." A collective inhale. Without a charter, a tradesman was no better than a beggar. Marta's fingers found the coin in her pocket. A single silver piece wouldn't cover the tavern's dues, but it might buy time. Then the hall's doors banged open. Baronet Gareth strode in, his boots muddy, his cloak flung back to reveal the sword at his hip. Behind him came two guards dragging a figure in chains, a young man, his face bloodied, his tunic torn. "The weaver's son. Found him hiding in the rye field," Gareth announced, his voice booming in the sudden silence. "Seems he's been passing messages for that traitorous scribe." The abbot's brows rose. "Has he now?" The boy, no older than Tomas, shook his head wildly. "I didn't. I just gave her bread. She said she was hungry." Gareth backhanded him across the mouth. "Liar." He turned to the abbot. "My lord's patience wears thin. The wench stole sensitive documents. She'll likely try to reach the magistrate at Larkspur." A pause. Then, deliberately, the abbot's gaze slid to Marta. Her blood turned to ice. "The tavern," he said slowly, "is the last stop before the Larkspur Road." Every eye in the hall fixed on her. Marta forced her voice steady. "I've seen no one." Gareth stepped closer. "You're certain?" The coin burned in her pocket. "Certain." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Gareth smiled, a slow, cruel thing. "Then you won't mind if we search the place." They came at dusk, 6 of them, their torches painting the tavern's walls in flickering orange. Marta stood stiff-backed behind the counter as Gareth's men overturned benches, stabbed their blades into straw mattresses, even pried up floorboards in search of hidden compartments. Tomas had been sent to fetch water, a flimsy excuse to get him out of harm's way. The boy had gone white-lipped but obeyed, shooting one last terrified glance at Marta before disappearing into the gathering dark. "You've made a mistake," Gareth said, idly flipping through the ledger Marta had just retrieved from the abbey. "Harboring a fugitive is treason." Marta watched him trace the entries, the debts, the payments, the careful tallies of ale and bread. "I harbor no one," she said flatly. A guard descended from the upstairs rooms, shaking his head. Gareth's mouth twisted. He snapped the ledger shut, and a loose page fluttered out. Marta's breath caught. It was an old list, half-faded, pinned in her late husband's hand. Barrels ordered, grain stores, payments owed. But Gareth didn't see that. He saw only the blank back of the sheet, and the fresh ink bleeding through. He held it up to the torchlight. Ira's handwriting. "The Larkspur magistrate will be at the crossroads in 3 nights hence. Give him this." And below, a list of names. Lord Edric's collaborators. The miller's accident. The missing tax silver. Gareth's face darkened. "You bitch." Marta didn't flinch. "You can't read." The words hung between them, sharp as a drawn blade. Gareth's hand went to his sword, and the tavern door burst open. Harold filled the doorway, his hammer slung across his shoulders. Behind him crowded a dozen villagers, the weaver, the butcher, even old Joran leaning on his cane. All bore tools. All bore faces set like stone. Gareth's men froze. "You're trespassing," Harold rumbled. The baronet sneered. "This is Lord Edric's land." "No." Father Alden stepped forward, his cassock mud-splashed, his breath coming hard as if he'd run all the way from the chapel. He held up a sealed parchment. "By the abbot's decree, The tavern's charter is under ecclesiastical protection. His gaze flicked to Marta. Any violation is an offense against the church. A lie. They all knew it. But the seal was real enough, fresh wax still gleaming. Gareth hesitated. Then, with a growl, he flung Ira's note into the fire. This isn't over. The villagers parted to let him pass, their silence more threatening than any shout. Only when the torches had faded into the night did Marta sag against the counter, her legs trembling. Harold caught her elbow. You all right? She nodded, mute. Father Alden knelt by the hearth, but the note was already ash. Doesn't matter, he said quietly. I memorized the names. Old Joran spat into the fire. We all did. The magistrate came on a morning rhymed with frost. By then, the crossroads had burned to the ground. Lord Edric's men had vanished into the woods, and the tavern's roof, miraculously, no longer leaked. Marta never learned where Ira had gone, but sometimes, when the fire burned low and the ale flowed freely, the villagers would whisper of a scribe in Larkspur who'd helped bring down a corrupt lord. They'd raise their cups to her, then drink deep, their eyes sliding to Marta in silent understanding. And in the ledger, now balanced, now safe, a single silver coin remained tucked between the pages, its edges worn smooth by restless fingers. A reminder, a promise. Trouble always picked its moment. But so did she. Winter came early that year. Frost etched delicate patterns across the tavern's windows each morning, and the villagers began gathering around the hearth not just for warmth, but for news. The roads had grown dangerous, bandits emboldened by Lord Edric's fall, mercenaries fleeing the magistrate's justice, and rumors of a coming war in the northern provinces. Marta kept the tavern open later these days, the fire burning long into the night. She knew what the villagers weren't saying, that the tavern had become more than a place for ale and gossip. It was a refuge now, a stronghold where the weak could find shelter and the hunted could catch their breath. Tonight, the air smelled of pine and wet wool as a group of travelers huddled near the hearth. A cloth merchant from the south, 2 journeyman carpenters, and a quiet woman with a loot case strapped to her back. The woman hadn't spoken since she arrived, but her fingers tapped an unfamiliar rhythm against her mug, her eyes scanning the room with the wary alertness of someone used to danger. Tomas, now taller and broader from a summer of hauling barrels, nudged Marta as he refilled the carpenter's drinks. That one's trouble, he murmured, nodding toward the lute player. Marta didn't reply. She'd seen the way the woman's cloak fell open just enough to reveal the hilt of a dagger, not the crude, practical blade of a farmer, but something slender and deadly. A noble's weapon. The door creaked open, letting in a flurry of snow and a gust of icy wind. All conversation ceased as a hooded figure stepped inside, his boots leaving muddy prints on the freshly swept floor. Marta's hand stilled on the tap. The stranger pushed back his hood, revealing a face half hidden by a thick beard and a jagged scar that ran from temple to jaw. His eyes, pale as winter sky, locked onto Marta's. Been a long time, he said. The voice sent a shock through her. That gravelly rasp, the hint of a northern accent she hadn't heard in 15 years. Jacob, her husband's brother. The mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The shards of the broken mug glittered between them like scattered stars. Marta didn't move. Couldn't. The tavern's usual clamor had died to a hush, every patron sensing the shift in the air, the way Jacob's presence seemed to carve a space around him, cold and deliberate. Tomas was the first to break the silence. Who? Out, Marta said, her voice low. The boy hesitated, but one look at her face had him backing toward the kitchen, hurting the confused carpenters ahead of him. Only the lute-playing woman remained, her fingers now still on her dagger's hilt. Jacob ignored them all. He stepped closer, snow melting from his cloak onto the floorboards. You look well, sister. The word was a blade. Marta had never been his sister, not truly. Jacob had been her husband's brother in blood only, a man who'd always carried violence in his smile. What do you want? She asked. He chuckled, the sound like gravel shifting. Straight to business. Always practical. He reached into his cloak, and the lute player tensed. But what he drew forth wasn't steel. It was a letter, its seal broken, the parchment yellowed at the edges. "Found this in my brother's things," he said, tossing it onto the counter between them. After he died, Marta didn't touch it. She didn't need to. She knew what it was. 15 years ago, her husband had been more than a tavern keeper. He'd been a scribe, like Ira, a man who'd kept records too dangerous for lords to ignore. And when the old baron's men came for him, he'd sent Marta and Tomas away with nothing but a bag of coins and a warning: don't trust Jacob. The night he died, the tavern had burned to the ground. Now Jacob tapped the letter. He wrote about a ledger, one that named names, said you'd know where it was. Marta's pulse hammered in her throat. The ledger he meant wasn't the one she used now. It was the old one, her husband's last work, hidden beneath the floorboards of the rebuilt tavern. A record of every bribe, every murder, every stolen acre that had propped up the old baron's rule. A record that could topple the new magistrate just as easily. She forced a laugh. "You're chasing ghosts." That ledger burned with him. Jacob's smile didn't waver. He leaned in, his breath sour with ale and old rot. "See, that's what I thought. Until I heard about your little rebellion last autumn." His gaze flicked to the lute player. "About the scribe you sheltered. Funny coincidence, isn't it?" The lute player stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "Enough." Jacob didn't even glance at her. "This doesn't concern you, girl." "It does," she said, and drew her dagger. For the first time, Jacob looked surprised, then amused. "You're protecting her? A tavern whence you wouldn't spit on you if you were on fire?" The woman's blade didn't waver. "I owe her a debt." Marta stared at her. The set of her jaw, the way she held the knife. Not like a noble playing at swords, but like someone who'd used one before. Ira's work, she realized. This woman was one of hers. Jacob sighed and straightened. "Fine." He reached into his cloak again, slowly, deliberately, and this time, he drew a knife of his own. "But debts get paid in blood, girl. Always have." The tavern door burst open. Harold filled the frame, his hammer already in hand. Behind him crowded a dozen villagers, the weaver with her shears, the butcher with his cleaver, even old Joran leaning on his walking stick like a club. Jacob froze. Harold's voice was a rumble. "Problem." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Jacob sheathed his blade with a laugh. "No problem." He stepped back, his gaze lingering on Marta, just catching up with family. He turned to leave, but paused at the threshold. "Oh, almost forgot." He tossed a small object onto the counter, a silver coin, identical to the one Ira had left. Except this one was crusted with something dark. "Blood. From your son," Jacob said. "He's waiting outside." Marta's world tilted. "Tomas." She was moving before she realized it, shoving past Harold into the snow-choked yard. The cold hit her like a slap, the wind howling through the empty stable. No sign of Tomas. No sign of. Then she saw it. A single boot, half buried in the snow. Tomas's boot. The villagers searched all night. They combed the woods, the mill pond, even the abandoned shepherd's hut where Lord Edric's men had once hidden. But Tomas was gone. Only the boot remained, its laces neatly cut. Marta sat by the hearth as dawn crept in, the lute-playing woman. Liz, she'd called herself, keeping watch at the door. The old ledger lay open on Marta's lap, its pages filled with her husband's careful script. Names, dates, crimes. All these years, she'd kept it hidden. All these years, she'd told herself it was for Tomas's sake, that the past should stay buried. Now Jacob had taken him. Liz cleared her throat. "We could find Ira. She has friends at court now. Influence." Marta didn't answer. She traced a name on the page. Magistrate Alden, the current magistrate's father. The man who'd ordered her husband's death. The apple hadn't fallen far from the tree. Outside, the village stirred to life. The baker's boy passed the tavern, his arms full of loaves. The weaver's daughter chased a stray chicken across the square. Normalcy. Peace. A lie. Marta closed the ledger. "Gather them," she said. Liz frowned. "Who?" "Everyone who owes me a favor." They came at dusk. Harold with his hammer, Father Alden with his prayers, the weaver with her shears, and a dozen others. Even the carter, still nursing bruises from Lord Edric's men, limped in with a cudgel in hand. Marta stood before them, the ledger in one hand, Jacob's bloodied coin in the other. "My son is gone," she said, her voice steady. "Taken by a man who thinks secrets are currency." She tossed the coin onto the table. "But we know the truth. Secrets are just weapons waiting to be wielded." She opened the ledger and began to read. The magistrate arrived on a morning softened by the season's first warmth. He came with guards, with pomp, with a warrant for Marta's arrest. He found the tavern empty. No sign of Marta. No sign of the ledger. Only a single silver coin on the counter, its surface polished clean. And carved into the wood beneath it, a single word. "Remember,